A bomb attack in Saudi Arabia. Now U.S. officials are waiting to talk to a Saudi man they think was involved. Hani Abdul Rahim Al Saeg was arrested in Ottawa in March. He was extradited last week. He has agreed to plead guilty to a conspiracy charge in exchange for telling what he knows about the Saudi bombing. In New York this morning, Al Saeg's lawyer, Michael Wiles. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
What was your client's involvement in the Al Khobar bombing?
I spoke to my client as recent as an hour ago, and he emphatically denies having been at the Khobar Towers during the time of the bombing and having any information that would help the authorities in this regard.
So he has nothing to tell them whatsoever about the Al Khobar bombing?
That's what my client maintains at this time. He feels that he has many witnesses that can place him in Qom, Iran at the time, and he is very concerned that he is going to be the basis upon which the United States might retaliate against a third country, perhaps even Iran, which has been implicated.
He has agreed to plead guilty to a count of conspiracy involving another bombing matter, I understand.
An indictment has been returned against Mr. Saeg for an unrelated and unsuccessful conspiracy charge. As far as any agreement is concerned, I'm bound by a court's order sealing that agreement from disclosing to your viewers any of the contents of it. I can tell you that I'm an immigration lawyer from New York who got a phone call in the middle of the evening that this gentleman was holed up in a jail in Ottawa and that the Canadian authorities were threatening to return him and deport him to Saudi Arabia, where he would be forcibly, if not summarily, executed.
Okay, well, you can't tell me what's in the agreement, but you can tell me that the agreement exists.
There is an agreement that I brokered on behalf of Mr. Saeg with the Justice Department, the FBI, so that he could enter the United States, and the terms of that agreement are under seal at this time.
But I can infer from this, and I guess you can blink once for yes or two for no, or don't have to worry about any of that, but I can infer from this that he has agreed to plead guilty to something.
The plea has not been made yet in court, and I believe there will be a proceeding at 10 o'clock this morning, and that plea will be put off, I believe. Mr. Saeg is being put to enormous pressures at this time. He's calling his family, the Bureau, the Justice Department is very anxious to get information to investigate these atrocities. Whether or not my client will enter a plea or what agreement exists, again, I am bound by a judge's order sealing my lips.
Okay. I don't know about the Justice Department, but the Canadian Secret Service is pretty sure that your client is a member of Hezbollah.
My client called me at that time when the Canadians made these allegations, and he was very concerned that they would just summarily deport him to Saudi Arabia. Now, he has had affiliations with Hezbollah and other organizations, but the question is whether or not there is any hard evidence and whether or not this gentleman had his due process privileges respected in Canada.
Well, people are trying to make a connection between the Al Khobar bombing and the Iranians, and that's why your client is so important. He studied in Iran, and he had been a member of Hezbollah, which is supported by Iran. What is he saying about this Iranian connection?
Well, he's very concerned that he not become the basis of any retaliation against Iran or any linkage to Iran. Again, he claims that he had nothing to do with it and that he wasn't there. I'm not a criminal expert. I am an immigration attorney that kept this man from harm's way. As far as any linkage, I would feel that it would be hard-pressed for the United States government or any other international government to come up with some evidence other than rounding up the usual suspects and detainees. I believe that the basis of the Canadian intelligence information was the Saudi intelligence sources, where they just rounded up detainees and got them to rat on this gentleman.
Okay, your client then presumably has got a great interest in not going back to Saudi Arabia, where they not only have capital punishment, but it's beheading. So if he says to you, look, Mr. Lawyer, what are my chances of being extradited back to Saudi Arabia now that I am in the United States? You say what?
Well, if he pleads guilty and makes an agreement with the government, that agreement would be binding on the next years of my client's life. If he pleads not guilty, the Justice Department then has to make a decision whether or not they will prosecute him, and if so, it would go to trial. If they decided not to prosecute him and deport him, then the question is whether or not they would be brazen enough to return him to Saudi Arabia, where we understand within hours he would be on the chopping block. He has a wife and 2 children in Saudi Arabia. They are continually being monitored by the Saudi intelligence, and this is a very hot powder keg in the Middle East, this whole case.
Well, those are very interesting questions. Do you have any answers? Would they do it?
Would they do what, sir?
Would they deport your client to Saudi Arabia if he resists this charge?
They could try. They could try. Unfortunately, the American government and the Saudi government has a very love-hate relationship. They are notorious for human rights violations, and at the same time we broker billions of dollars of business deals between the 2 nations. And yet, when we know that they have these kind of public beheadings on main streets, they would not hesitate to return a man to that kind of fate. And I'm very concerned about that. The question is, can we get another country to intervene, or whether or not this man has a viable political asylum claim? Of course, that would be mitigated by any claims that he was part of a terrorist organization. And again, we're not in that kind of proceeding at this time. I have withdrawn as his criminal attorney, as my bailiwick, as a partner in a major immigration firm in New York, is immigration law. But I feel very confident that he will be given his day in court here if